Welcome to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, episode 99. We are here, one away from 100, and I'll probably say that about 3 or 4 more times in this episode, because we are extremely excited. Not even going to give you a teaser what's coming up on that one. We've got some big news to share with everybody, but before we jump into today's topic, let's take that brief moment and thank our episode sponsor.
Are you leaving money on the table? Are you an accredited investor seeking new and exciting investment opportunities? Look no further than Integrated Investment Group, your trusted partner in financial success. At IIG, the focus is on delivering exclusive investment options tailored to your unique needs and goals. Contact them today and let their expert team guide you toward your financial aspirations. Wondering if you qualify as an accredited investor? Visit teachingtaxflow.com/IIG to find out and take the first step towards a brighter financial future. Integrated Investment Group, your path to financial success begins here. Securities offered through Cabin Securities. Member FINRA SIPC.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Teaching Tax Flow, the podcast. As you've seen in the intro, the title, if you read there, we're going to talk about something that piques a lot of interest. And I would be completely remiss if I did not mention that we are one episode away from 100. That's right. We're turning triple digits. We're getting older, as they say, or I don't know. I'm sure the kids got a term out there now that they refer to that as, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. But with this topic today, we brought on a great guest, which we'll introduce here in a moment. And again, this is a topic that it seems like I wouldn't necessarily say there's misinformation out there. There's almost a lack of information and definitions, etc. that's out there. So we're going to get into it. We're going to dive into it. But I guess we had to have him back. Chris Picciurro, how's it going, my man?
It is going wonderfully. Thank you very much for having me back. Excited to be here. I'm very excited about our special guest this week. I'm not kidding you. As a CPA and owning a CPA firm and tax planner, I get asked at least 5 times a week about the topic that we're going to discuss today. And we are going to discuss what we call BOI, Beneficial Ownership Interest or Information Reporting, due to the Corporate Transparency Act. So anyone that has an entity, it could be an LLC, it could be a corp. In general, if you file with the state and you own an entity, you have additional federal reporting to do separate from preparing a tax return. And the penalties for not conforming to this are significant.
Right. A little bit more than slap on the wrist, right? It's a little bit harsher.
Right. No, I'm definitely not excited about the Corporate Transparency Act, but it's here. It's been here for a while. We are sitting now 2/3 the way through 2024. Time is slipping away here. And for the vast majority of entities, their filing deadline is December 31st of this year. And if you're going to be working with a professional, which I would recommend you deeply consider, there's something called supply and demand. And that means that as time gets closer to the end of the year, the cost of compliance and the stress is going to increase. So, but without further ado, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna introduce our special guest. She is a wealth of knowledge. We have been working with her in our private CPA practice, and asking her. We've been pestering her with questions for months about this, and then we said, "Dang it, let's have her on the show." Angelina Urquhart, welcome from Corpnet. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. Yeah, I understand the BOI is going to be a bit of a headache for a lot of people because we just have to get used to yet another regulation, right? But I'm here to help.
Absolutely. And that's the key is it's something that the first thing I want people to understand is something separate from your tax return. For your income tax return. This is a self-reporting requirement that anyone with any type of entity in the United States has to comply with. And the penalties are stiff. But let's talk first about the BOI, or Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting, and talk about the Corporate Transparency Act and what that, what type of entities are required to report, and who are they reporting to, Angelina?
So they're reporting to FinCEN, which is a federal entity that basically is well, I'll put it this way. The guise is to get rid of people being able to own entities and not take responsibility of them. They want to be able to have a person at the end of every entity that they can tap on their shoulder when and if there's something a little amiss with the operations of a particular entity. So the day of you creating an LLC and having it owned by another LLC is still there, but you still have to now indicate this is a managing person, or this is the person who's benefiting from the operations of that entity. To answer your question about who has to do it, it's going to be most LLCs and most corporations. Nonprofits, you don't have to, because they already know who you are and where you are. If you're grossing over $5 million and your homes in your U.S. based, they already know who you are and where you are. So it's everybody outside of that for the most part. Heavy hitters, they know who you are. They already know before you even open your mouth to identify yourself. They know where you are. So it's the mom and pops, it's the small entities, it's the, I'm grossing $3 million. They want to know who you are and who's benefiting from that.
Right. FinCEN it stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it's a bureau of the United States Department of Treasury. And that's what I think people don't understand. I mean, I've talked to someone, very intelligent business owner, says, well, I registered my LLC with the state. And, that state, it could be anywhere. It happens to be the state of Tennessee for this person. However, the federal government really has no way to figure out who owns those entities. And it would take an extreme amount of resources for them to dive into every state filing. And even if you have a state filing, a lot of times a registered agent or a third party is going to file on behalf of an individual. So this is a way for entities to self-report who ultimately is the owner of these entities. And the purpose of this law is anti-money laundering. I mean, that's really in trying to figure out who the bad guys are out there and making sure that money is not funneled into the country either illegally or for terrorist activities.
Exactly.
And that's why the Corporate Transparency Act, was born. Now, just like any law, sometimes there are repercussions to the law, and so maybe, especially people in Washington, D.C., sometimes they don't think through the real ramifications of creating a law. So,
no, they never think through.
No, of course not. And Angelina has mentioned.
But, I want to add to what you said there, if I could. We have states like Delaware and Wyoming that do not require on a state level for the business owner to expose themselves. So for a large portion of America, these businesses are operating and there isn't anyone saying we need to know who you are. So I think that tends to add to the reason for this particular regulation.
That's a great point. And that's where even if the federal government took its resources and contacted each state to try to figure out who owns these entities, many states don't even allow that. And that's why, one of the things that Corpnet does, besides we're here to talk about the BOI today, but does act as a registered agent. I could speak quite candidly for myself. We've worked with Corpnet to form an LLC, one of our LLCs ourselves. So they act as a registered agent. They act to help form those LLCs. And a lot of times, like Angelina mentioned, there are certain states that have a little more privacy around that information. Wyoming, Nevada, Delaware are usually the usual suspects from what I'm seeing. So the federal government, even if they tried to query that database, it would be very limited in what they're finding. Angelina did point out something as well. There's a list of exceptions to this rule. So there are certain businesses that do not have to file I'm going to tell you the vast majority of our private CPA firm clients and anyone listening to this has to file. It's the big dogs, right? That don't have to file. That are already publicly traded and or they're an insurance company that already has to disclose all this information anyway. So,
or banks, security entities. It is, for the most part, it's going to be everybody that's probably tuning into this podcast, because anybody outside of the people that we're talking to now probably will have to file. Even, and I will also like to add, even if you closed your entity in 2024, if you went to the Secretary of State and dissolved your entity, you still need to do it, because they want to know what has been done prior to that closure. And you'll probably have to do it just at one time, but especially if there's been any money of significance, like $1,500 or so, you opened up a bank account, you still need to get this filed.
That's actually interesting. That's the first time I've heard that one. And actually, if I can connect a couple dots here too. So really CTA, it's, me being the marketing guy, I'm like, oh, call to action. It's not it. Corporate Transparency Act is what CTA is referred to. And then there's BOI. So beneficial ownership information reporting is kind of what that is, right? So really, for those that this might be the first time that they're hearing of this, really the CTA, so the Corporate Transparency Act, is obviously just that. That's the act, that's put in place. And then BOI is basically the requirement that comes in under that act.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Just kind of laying that out there, because I know we kind of use them a lot, in cahoots with each other.
One of the same thing. Yeah.
So we identified that what are the affected entities. There are some exceptions, but the vast majority of entities do have to fulfill this requirement. Angelina mentions it's LLCs, it's corporations, but in general, think about any entity that you file paperwork with the state to form. So like a sole proprietor would not have to file, right? Because they don't own an entity. But Angelina, on the beneficial ownership interest, what type of people have to be identified on this report so let's say we have a corporation.
So this is going to be directed towards anyone that has 25% or more ownership. So if it's you and your kids, and maybe you've issued 16% to your kids, but they're 18, they're 20, they don't have a significant amount of skin in the game, it doesn't apply to them. It applies to anyone that owns 25% or more. And you would have to refile if you were a single LLC member, for instance, and you decided to take on a partner and you're splitting that ownership, you're going to have to refile.
That's a great point. So and that's something where I've had a lot of spirited conversations with other tax professionals about doing this type of work. And then there's this whole concept of is this legal work? Are we attorneys? I don't really look at it that way. I think that, but you made a great point. Yeah, you can file a report. So let's say John and I create a corporation. We own 50% each, and we file our BOI, right? And let's say we bring Angelina as a third owner in the middle of the year. Now we all own a third. We have to go file again within a very short time period, or there could be, we're going to talk about penalties in a little bit, but there could be significant penalties, even if we change our address or anything changes on this form. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. So the idea, I think, was that, definitely it's not a yearly requirement. The only time that you would have to refile it is if the business moves, if the owners move, if there's a change of percentage of ownership amongst the registered owners, or if the identification that you use to prove who you are expired. So oftentimes I tell people, use your passport. Your passport tends to have a lot more time on it than your driver's license. And you can always stick a little sticker in your passport in the back and just, note to self, you need to refile your BOI when you're redoing your passport, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's probably going to be for most people every 4 years, 5 years, if they use their IDs.
That's an amazing point, right? So it's a filing. So think about this if you listen. It's a one-time filing to start. However, every time there's a change to your filing, that has to be reflected in. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about penalties at the end here. But something as easy as a driver's license expiring, or you move. If you move, there's a filing requirement, or the business address moves, or you bring on a new owner of 25%. And that's really, we know people that, I was talking to another CPA last month, and actually earlier this month, and they said they have a client with 150 rental properties. Every rental property has a separate LLC. That's 158 filings. Not doing those filings would probably be about a 6-figure penalty. So it's all relative. And that's why I think that everyone needs to really consider if this is something that they want to tackle. I didn't even realize. I knew if you changed addresses, you had to amend your filing. But great point on an expiring passport, or if you get married, or if you anything that could. So the worst thing you do is ignore this. Obviously,
I'm sitting here again, kind of jotting notes down, and it's little tips like that too that are the reminders. Because again, this is not something like, oops, I forgot to pay a parking ticket, and okay, you just go pay the $10-15 and call it a day. I mean, this is very, very significant. And again, kind of echo what Chris says. I love that little recommendation about the passport. Like it sounds wild, but yeah, it's like relating it to something that you almost think about more than that. And even if you don't plan on traveling, renew your passport. And then Chris, a question for you too. I mean, with Tax Pros, right? So we've been traveling a little bit. We've been to a lot of conferences over the past 2-3 months. And yeah, it seems like in the community of tax professionals, there's a lot of kind of up in the air. What are we going to do with this? And from what I'm hearing, a lot of them are really finding a partner to work with, because it's not something that a lot of them are going to do in-house, right? So it's, obviously we have a resource.
Yeah, it's all over the board. It is all over the board. Some of them are trying to take it on. My thought is always with our private CPA practices and in the teaching tax law community, what's best for our clients. And what's best for our clients is to work with a professional firm that's committed to not just this, but other entity-related services that is extremely economical for the service provided, that's dedicated to it. Because ultimately, if you're a tax professional and you are in the grind of tax compliance season and it's March 1st and you're up to your years in tax returns and you have a random client that says, hey, by the way, I moved and I changed my address. What are the chances that you might forget to update your BOI reporting and now your client could get penalized heavily? So that's where I think that it's just best to work with someone or have some type of a system or process, because think about it, you've got to track the expiration dates of all these identification pieces as well. So there's a lot to consider. And, one other thing that I spoke with a bunch of bankers, don't make a big habit of that. However, there's some chatter out there that some of the banks will be, even to set up a bank account, requiring that you prove that you did your BOI reporting.
Oh, absolutely. That's a requirement to open up the bank account now. They want to see that with your operating agreement, with your articles, they want to see that you've done your due diligence. And a lot of our clients found that out right away. So there's just no skipping this.
Yeah, they found out the hard way that they rolled into the bank to set up their account with their federal ID number, and they said,
exactly.
What do we got going here? And then I think the banks will sweep through and eventually, especially if they have a loan out, if they have there's just, it's one of those things that, yes, is it pesky? I look at it like this. It's basically the equivalent of putting on your seatbelt. For people that grew up,
it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, it is a necessary evil. And for people that, like, maybe my parents' age that never wore seatbelts until you had to, it's kind of annoying. For people my age that we grew up, always putting our seatbelt on, it's muscle memory. When you get in a car, you just put that seatbelt on like this. But if you don't, was it easier to not have your seatbelt on? Sure. But what happens if a lot of bad can happen if you don't. A lot of bad. And that's what you've got to consider. However, and there's a rule why we should have safety belts. That's just the way it is.
Although, Chris, I think we were both around when the Buick, was it a Buick, the little Woody station wagons where the seat was facing backwards? I don't remember there being seatbelts on those things.
Yeah,
although there might be.
There wasn't.
No, there's
Listen, I'm from New York, and in the cabs, we had the front and back face cabs, and there was no seatbelt.
That's a good point.
There's no seatbelt.
Let's talk.
And the station
Oh
wagon.
gosh, yeah.
Yep. The station wagons are always scary. Those things, it's like,
Yeah,
you get hit anywhere in
Yeah.
those things. It's
you're dying.
Oh yeah, no, we've got some funny stories driving in a hatchback. So let's talk about time frame, because then we'll wrap up with penalties, Angelina, because there are different rules for when your entity was actually created. And can you kind of talk us through that a little bit?
So if you create your entity in 2024, you have 90 days to comply. If you've created your entity prior to 2024, the federal government has given you a grace period to comply by December 31st. In 2025, the reins are tightened. You have 30 days for every new entity. And if there's any changes from the date of the accepted change, you have 30 days to refile.
30 days goes quick, not 30
Yes, it does.
business days.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, Angelina, because originally it was 30 days for the new filing, and they said, wait, that's a lot. So that you're right, they gave people grace for 2024 for those new entities, but that's gone.
That's gone.
And that's why, I think that having a company that working, or if you do it on your own, just having a way to monitor any of these changes and reporting them in a prompt fashion is important. So yeah, those penalties. So if you had an entity you just created this year, you have a little more grace. If you've created it before 2024, then you have until January or December
31st.
You have till the end of this year to comply, to file that. But I would not wait towards the end of the year. I think the FinCEN website could, honestly, I think it's going to crash at the end of December.
Right. That's what we're seeing. And that's the kind of conversation that we're seeing across the industry, is that the pricing is going to go up in terms of getting it done, because the onus is going to be on us to make sure that your filing is done correctly, right? So, and it's a seat that we sit in comfortably. We do compliance. We help people keep their entities in good standing. And this is a bigger deal than, I forgot to file my annual report, because the penalties for this is a lot worse than, what you have to do in some states.
Yeah, if you forget to file your annual report as an LLC, usually it's a slap in the wrist, $50, $25. And again, you should always file it. This great segue to the final top point here. Penalties are civil and criminal penalties for not complying that are significant. Can you kind of guide us through that?
I would love to tell you. Can I interject one thing, because I want to make sure that we mention this, because I think it's kind of important. Now, it is the law of the land as it is right now. There are a couple states that are litigating to get it negated. However, at the end of the day, how long does it take for litigations to go through the court system? As of right now, it's a requirement. Not one state has been given, an exemption. So to say, okay, well, I'm in a state that I know that they're trying to fight against it, that's all well and good until that court decision comes down. So I would definitely err on the side of protecting yourself, as opposed to saying, oh, well, I know my state's fighting a good fight. Don't do that. Don't get caught up in that kind of stuff, because it's not worth it, in my opinion.
I mean, unless you can prove that you show someone the rock that you lived under, it's going to be hard to prove that you weren't aware of it. But again, things happen, right? I would say that the more common omission would be the new entities, where you just don't know. You're a new business owner.
Exactly. It's lonely down there and dark.
I agree. That's why we, think that's a great way to kind of wrap things up. Is this isn't going away. It's something ultimately. It's a safety belt for the federal government feels this is our safety belt from financial crimes, and then they'll reference that Al Capone, went to jail for tax evasion and not all the other bad stuff he did. There was this case in Alabama, but unless you're a part of that case, that you didn't, just get it done. It's not that big of a deal. It's only a big deal if you make it a big deal. And at this point, why ride it out? put your safety belt on. And we're going to put in the show notes, if you're at a crossroads and if you need some assistance, Angelina and Corpnet was kind enough to provide any of our Teaching Tax Flow podcast listeners a discount on this reporting. Angelina's been kind enough to extend her time to us and answer any questions as well. So we'll put that out in the show notes. Like I said, don't be an ostrich. Don't just put your head in the sand. So, and you never know. And the other thing is, you might, I've run into the situation where I've had some clients realize that they went to do this and they realize they haven't filed their renewals with the state for the last few years. If that's the case, definitely reach out to us here at Teaching Tax. So reach out to Angelina and Corpnet. They can help you act as registered agents, help you file for those LLCs, those corporations, and make sure that you stay in compliance.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
And Angelina, thank you so much for joining us on this. I know
Thank you.
We've had these brief discussions on this kind of leading up to it, and the timing is perfect. So we definitely appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. It was so nice doing it. Call me anytime.
Absolutely. And everybody that's listening to this, as Chris had mentioned too, in the show notes, wherever you listen to this podcast, we're going to put that direct link in there where you can schedule some time with Angelina. And don't be afraid to ask those questions, because don't worry, me and Chris have already grilled her on pretty much everything we can think of, and we haven't scared her away. So it's very doubtful that you will do the same. And I believe, Chris, it was last episode, one of us said it, I don't know if it was me or you, but this is a great example of it as well too. Like, ignorance is not bliss when it comes to this. I mean, this is not going anywhere that we know of, right, for the foreseeable future. So even if you do shove it under a rug, that little guy is going to poke up and it's going to bite you really, really hard. And it's not going to, it's not like you can just ignore this. And there will definitely be some repercussions. We don't know exactly how bad or how much they're going to enforce them. But Angelina, like you had mentioned, that the likelihood is that they will in some way, shape, or form whenever they decide to. Definitely take advantage of the time that you have here to do this much easier. And then, obviously not regret it later on when your pocket is yelling at you, your wallet's yelling at you as you do this. So take the advice that Angelina gave you as well, maybe associated with that passport, some of your state filings, take advantage of it, knock it out. And we will see you next week, episode 100 on the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you very, very soon.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.